economic dialogue that Hillary Clinton and Tim Geithner were in Beijing to have during the middle of this Chen issue are very good things.
And we take you now to Las Vegas, where the Libertarian Party is holding its presidential convention this week at Red Rock Resort. Tonight, a debate between the party's two candidates, former Republican New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson and Libertarian activist and former party Vice Chairman Lee Wrights.
Good evening, and welcome to the delegates of the 2012 Libertarian National Convention. And welcome to our friends in the C-SPAN audience, and welcome to all who support the cause of human liberty. This is the presidential nominating convention of the Libertarian Party. Tonight is the final candidates debate. There have already been several of them. Only two candidates have survived a rigorous process to qualify for this debate. And they are, coming on stage, Mr. Lee Wrights, and Mr. Wrights hails from Burnett, Texas, and our second candidate, Gary Johnson. I think you all know Gary is the former governor of New Mexico, and he's currently a resident of Taos, New Mexico. Now, a word or two about the format for the debate. Each candidate will have a 3-minute opening statement in which they can tell you just about anything they'd like to tell you in the first 3 minutes. After that, we will have questions. And each candidate will have 90 seconds maximum to answer the questions that are posed. There's some possibility of rebuttals if something comes up in one man's response that could use a quick rebuttal, and those rebuttal will be limited to 30 seconds. At the conclusion, we'll have a 3-minute concluding statement. We have in front of us a timer so that it's possible for all of us up here to see how much time has elapsed, and to help us in keeping in order. Delegates also have had the opportunity to submit some questions, and we have some of those. I'll try to present those, perhaps paraphrased to fit better into this format. So, with that introduction, I would like to begin, and I will alternate in the response time. So. That seems fair. So, Mr. Johnson, will you begin with your 3-minute opening statement?
Governance in this country needs to occur under strict adherence to the U.S. Constitution. The bad news is that this country is in really deep trouble. We're going to experience a collapse in government. We're going to experience a monetary collapse, given the fact that we're borrowing and printing money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar. That's the bad news. The good news is that we can fix this. We went to the moon, we can fix this. And to fix this, we need to stop printing money. We need to slash spending, and we need to do that now. As President of the United States, I am making 3 promises. First promise, I promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. Now, that's not promising a balanced budget because Congress is going to have to go along with that. But I am going to submit a document with a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending, a 43% reduction in federal spending. Second promise, I promise to veto any expenditures that exceed revenue. As governor of New Mexico, I may have vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined. I have no aversion to vetoing legislation. I suggest to you that with those promises kept, that spending will be lower than any other possible scenario that you could come up with. Lastly, I am promising to advocate on the part of throwing out the entire federal tax system. No income tax, no corporate tax, no tax withholding. Abolish the IRS. Replace it with a consumption tax, which I think, from a libertarian standpoint, sets the stage for zero tax. I think the pressure will be on the consumption tax, and I am advocating the fair tax. I think the pressure is going to be on that tax to reduce it, to reduce it, to reduce it, to the point where we don't have taxes any longer. But at a minimum, it's an improvement over what we currently have. It arguably is cost neutral. It gives America competitive edge when it comes to exports. It's the answer when it comes to exports. It's the answer when it comes to China. And it's the answer when it comes to jobs in this country, because in a zero corporate tax rate environment, if the private sector does not create tens of millions of jobs, then there is no environment under which that will happen. Thank you.
Mr. Wrights.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm at a family reunion. I wish America could be in this room with us, not just on the screen, but in this room to feel what we have here, something that's so different from politics in America today. I'm running for president. This is for you, America. I'm running for president so I can leave you alone. The greatest problems we have in this country right now is we've learned to seek our solutions from government. What makes libertarians a little bit different is we've learned that government is not the solution. Government exacerbates all the problems that we have. Now my campaign promise, my main campaign promise, is when I become president, first act I will perpetrate is I'm going to declare peace. I'm not just talking about the foreign interventions that we're involved in, which are way too many. I'm talking about the wars that we have right here at home, the most devastating wars that we could have that are breaking us economically and morally. I'm reminded of in the 60s and President Johnson, his great society, where you're going to have a war on poverty. No more poor people. Think about it. The war didn't work. President Carter came along and gave us the Federal Education Department because he knew how hard it was for us to raise our children. We're going to have a war on ignorance. Wipe it out. Been churning out functional illiterates ever since. The most devastating war that this country's ever known, the war on drugs started by President Nixon, has got to stop. When we've done the research, what we've learned is war don't work. They don't solve the problems. You don't teach people it's wrong to kill people by killing people. You don't teach foreign countries it's wrong to bomb people by bombing other countries. That's why I'm glad to be here tonight, to be able to offer libertarians and Americans rational alternatives and true choices, something that we so sorely need. Join me in saying, I am not at war, because if enough of us say it, they can't have them anymore.
Now we're going to go into the question and answer portion. I have a couple of questions to begin with, which I think will be of particular interest to the delegates to a Libertarian Party convention. So my first question is to you, Mr. Wrights. Tell us about your discovery of the Libertarian Party and what brought you to join it.
I discovered the Libertarian Party in the latter part of the 1990s. Well, actually, I discovered them before that. That's when I actually joined the party. But my journey to libertarianism was kind of different than other people. I've never been anything else. See, my father raised a libertarian. I don't know that my father's ever voted. I'm not sure he even knew what the word libertarian meant. In fact, I'm sure he didn't. But he raised a libertarian, someone that knows how to mind their own business when they're supposed to, be helpful to their neighbor when they need it, but keep your nose out of their business when they don't need it, to be responsible for yourself. Libertarianism is a life choice, ladies and gentlemen. It's more than a political party. It's more than the people in this room. Because these people in this room have done as I have done. We've made a personal choice to live responsibly for ourselves, not to seek help from government agencies, but to be sufficient on our own. So just the natural way I was raised as a child brought me to the Libertarian Party. In '76, I was a brand new voter. I lived in North Carolina, and there was no Libertarian Party at the time in North Carolina. And even then, at a young age, could not bring myself to register as a Democrat or Republican. The only thing I've ever been registered besides a Libertarian is an unaffiliated voter. Libertarians have the answers to the problems of this country, and we can give them to them now.
I believe it was in 1971 that I got a book handed to me. And it was a book that said, here's what it is to be a libertarian. And it was a very short read, and it said, after you've read this, please pass this book on so that others might share and understand what it is to be a libertarian. When I read that book, I very quickly recognized that I was a libertarian, and I've been a libertarian since. And basically, I came away from reading that book with the notion that, you know what, you're always going to be able to predict where a libertarian stands on all issues, because a libertarian is going to look at freedom first, that everything has a basis in freedom. And as long as that freedom doesn't impose on others, I mean force or fraud, then you should be free to exert that freedom. I passed that book on. I remember attending a congressional debate in New Mexico in the early 80s. There was the Democrat, there was the Republican, and there was the Libertarian. The discussion in the bar afterwards was, well, who won the debate? Well, everybody. Well, the Libertarian won the debate, but who are we going to vote for? Because the Libertarian's not going to win. Well, that has been the course of the Libertarian Party. Arguably, I got to serve 8 years as governor of New Mexico as a Libertarian governor under the guise of being a Republican. I am really... I've come out of the closet, and I hope I'm the first, if not the first of millions, to do the same.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I know from my own past experience that there are a couple of questions that always come up to Libertarian candidates. So I'm going to present them one at a time and see how you do with a nice, quick, succinct answer to this. What is the Libertarian Party?
What is the Libertarian Party? The Libertarian Party is the party that is going to stand up for personal freedom. The Libertarian Party is the party that's going to advocate on government's absolute responsibility, which is the notion to protect us against those individuals, groups, corporations that would do us harm. The Libertarian Party, I think, encompasses the best of both the donkeys and the elephants. And that is the notion that the donkeys have really stood up historically for civil liberties. I don't think they've done so well of late. I don't think they've done so well ever. Republicans, historically, is the party that's stood up for dollars and cents, balancing the checkbook. I don't think they've done so well of that of late, as of late, I don't know if they've ever done well by that. So I am telling people that the Libertarians encompass the best of both parties. The notion of fiscal responsibility, the notion of social tolerance. And in that context, that's where I stand. I think the majority of Americans stand. That gets your foot in the door. What are the problems facing this country? What are the solutions to those problems? And then as someone running for President of the United States, do you have a resume to suggest that you could actually carry out what it is that you're talking about?
Thank you. Mr. Wrights.
Well, as I said in my opening, the Libertarian Party to me personally is my family. What it should be to everyone is a home, just like for us. The Libertarian Party is America, Americans, every one of us, that realize the problems we face in this country are caused, more times than not, by the government that's supposed to be serving us. We wind up serving the government instead of the other way around. We understand that, we realize that, and this is our way of defending ourselves against the aggression of Democrats and Republicans that care more about corporate interests, banking interests, special interests, and lobbyists than they do the people they're supposed to represent. I'll yield the rest of my time.
We'll see if we can make good use of it. And the second of those ever-present questions to Libertarian candidates is, what is Libertarianism? And let's see, Mr. Wrights, I think you're next.
Well, I went into that a little bit earlier. Libertarianism is a life decision, a life choice, where we decide that we want to make our own decisions without anybody being involved in it. Our medical decisions, decisions about our marriage and who we're going to spend the rest of our lives with, the most intimate, personal questions that we need to resolve in our lives should be resolved by us, our families, our friends, not a set of bureaucrats hundreds of miles away, more interested in somebody else than they are about me. Libertarianism is realizing that it's okay to be different, because we understand that a government that can't protect us at the mall when we're able-bodied cannot possibly take care of us in our old age when we can't care for ourselves. These are all things that make up libertarianism. Knowing that we are better to make our own decisions than to put those decisions in the hands of someone else. I've learned from my life, every time I put decisions into the hands of someone else, my fate becomes uncertain because I've gifted them the power over me. Libertarians know better than to do that. We know the foibles to that, and that's why I'm here.
Mr. Johnson, what is libertarianism?
Just don't tell me what to do. And of course, if I'm going to put others in harm's way or do harm to others, yes, government needs to be involved. Libertarian is individualism. Ayn Rand really put into words what I had always felt in my life, and that was the power of the individual, the power that I have as an individual, and what is the best thing that I can do for others surrounding me to affect their lives in a positive way. It's to be the best that I can possibly be. And I think that's libertarianism. I think that's the freedom to make choices for ourselves, those choices in the context of not doing any harm to others.
And this will go to you first, Mr. Johnson. Do the Libertarians really want to end the federal government's war on drugs? Wouldn't doing so lead to excessive drug use and crime?
You know, 40 years ago when the Libertarian Party was founded, what were people pointing at the Libertarian Party and saying as a whole? Well, that's the kooky party that wants to legalize drugs. That was 40 years ago. And 40 years ago when I heard that, I wanted to understand what that meant. It didn't take long to understand that and to understand how much better it would be to decriminalize, legalize drugs. Came to that understanding. Drugs. We should be able to make our own choices when it comes to drugs. Let's legalize drugs, control it, regulate it, tax it. Libertarian Party 40 years ago talks about legalizing drugs. Well, now in this country we're at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point where 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. That has never happened before, and who deserves credit for that? The Libertarian Party deserves credit for that. So I think there's an opportunity here with the Libertarian Party that collectively the country is saying, well, that's the party that for the longest time has talked about legalizing drugs. We've been talking about the issue. We understand it. What else is the Libertarian Party talking about? I think there's an opportunity here to really change the world, and I am talking about the Libertarian Party changing the world.
Mr. Wrights.
There is a drug problem in this country, a horrible drug problem, and it's called the drug war. Now, I've heard it all. I've been around a long time. Libertarians want your children to get high all the time. No, we don't. We want to stop killing, because that's what war does, is kill. They're out there killing each other right now. Are they killing themselves over the drugs? Are they killing each other over the drugs? No. They're killing themselves over the money that can be made on inexpensive plants that we have turned into exorbitant profits because we prohibit something. America needs to take a lesson from her own history. We had a little prohibition problem in the last century because didn't nobody want anybody else to have a drink. So we prohibited alcohol. How did that turn out for us? Well, it created one of the largest criminal organizations the world has ever known. The mafia was little more than street gangs, unorganized, petty crimes. They outlawed alcohol, and it turned it into a criminal enterprise that is still going today. We got to start learning from our own history. These wars don't work. Let's find another solution. Let's stop sending people to prison. Let's send them to treatment.
Mr. Wrights, you get to begin on the next one. Where do libertarians stand on the question of whether individuals have the right to own and carry guns?
Well, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but it's not a good idea to crawl in my window after midnight. I don't dial 911. The founders knew exactly what they were doing, and I've often said that the only mistake they made in the Bill of Rights is they put the first right wrong. Second Amendment should have been the first. Because without that, without the ability to defend ourselves, all the other rights go away, folks. They can take away from you easily. The founders of this country didn't institute the Second Amendment because they were afraid of their neighbors. They knew they needed them to protect themselves from government. Now remember, the American Revolution was kicked off when the British marched to take away their guns. They tolerated everything else. They tolerated the taxes. But when they came to take their arms away from them, this country went into revolution. Don't make no mistake, I believe in gun control, folks. That's why I use both hands.
Mr. Johnson?
I think governance needs to occur under strict adherence to the United States Constitution. I don't know how the Second Amendment could be any clearer. I will tell you, running for governor of New Mexico the first time, and I've run for 2 political offices in my lifetime, this being the 3rd, but governor of New Mexico, re-election as governor of New Mexico. But in 1994, what was really a cutting-edge issue in 1994 was concealed carry. Not many states allowed for concealed carry, but it was an issue of the day. And I had many Republican opponents in the primary, all of whom were very well established. But when it came to the question of concealed carry, everybody was seeming to tap dance. And when the question came to me, I said, you know what? That sounds like a really good idea. It sounds like it would actually reduce gun violence, not increase gun violence. And that ended up as headlines in the paper the next day. I am not the guy who's going to sign off on legislation or promote legislation as to the number of bullets in the clip, the size of the gun, or the caliber of the weapon.
Mr. Johnson, you get first crack at the next one. What does your party want to do about the problems associated with illegal immigration?
Illegal immigration, bad thing. Legal immigration, good thing. I think we should make it as easy as possible for somebody that wants to come into this country and work to get a work visa. Not a green card, not citizenship, but a work visa that would entail a background check and a Social Security card so that applicable taxes would get paid. Now, if we implement the fair tax, taxes aren't an issue at all. Whether you're legal, illegal, visitor, U.S. citizen, you're not going to be able to avoid paying the fair tax. With regard to the 11 million illegal immigrants that are here in this country right now, we need to set up a grace period by which we can document those 11 million illegal immigrants. What's the main reason why we have 11 million illegal immigrants in this country? It's the unintended consequence of Reagan setting up his amnesty period in the 80s and coupling that with putting government in charge of quotas, matching up businesses with potential employees. Well, that was a breakdown from day one. If you want to come into this country and work, you can't get a work visa. And yet you know that if you come across the border that in fact you can get a work visa. So that's the phenomenon that has occurred. And then with regard to drug violence around the border, violence around the border is drug related, it's prohibition related. Legalized marijuana and arguably 75% of the border violence with Mexico goes away. This is a prohibition phenomenon.
Mr. Wrights.
Well, this is a good subject, particularly for libertarians, because illegal immigration is an area where we can truly show how government has made things worse. Now, how many of you watched Stossel? Let's hear it, come on. Stossel did a report several months ago, and I happened to see it. And it turns out that if you are a PhD, and you live in India, let's say, and you want to immigrate to this country, it takes you between 5 and 7 years. Now, that's a reasonable amount of time, most folks would say. Wait, it gets better. If you are an unskilled laborer from south of the border, it takes you 131 years. I don't know about y'all, but I don't know too many 130-year-old people running around. The reason we have an illegal immigration problem is because we made it impossible for people to follow the law. If you write a law that can't be followed, nobody's going to follow it. It's that simple. I mean, We have literally made it easier to swim the Rio Grande than it is to climb Mount Bureaucracy. That's the problem.
Mr. Wrights, the Social Security, somebody say Social Security for me. The Social Security program doesn't appear to be sustainable as currently constituted. What would a Libertarian president do about that?
I know what I would do about it. Libertarians believe in contracts. We believe in the sanctity of those contracts, individual contracts. That's what we base our or the way we do business with each other. Social Security is a contract. Our government has made a contract with each one of us individually, and they promise to take care of us when we're old. Good Lord. What I propose to do about Social Security is we need to honor the contracts that we've already made. What we need to stop doing is making new contracts that we know are bad. Let's stop lying to the young people of this country and telling them the money's going to be there when it ain't going to be there. We need somebody who's going to stop lying to America. Stop telling people they're going to get something when they know good and well they're not, that it's already bankrupt. Let's honor the contracts we've already made and stop making new bad contracts. Let the young people keep their money and plan for their own retirement. You take better care of yourself than the government can ever take care of you.
Social Security is a problem that is really pale in comparison to Medicare. Social Security is absolutely savable, if you will, and it happens through the following way. It's simply a system that needs to take in more money than what it pays out. So to reform Social Security, raising the retirement age, coming up with a means testing that can be very fair, changing the escalator built into Social Security from the wage index to the inflation rate, and then perhaps having an opt-in, opt-out provision. If we adopt the fair tax does away with withholdings from your payroll check. So no more contributions to Social Security, no more employer match that would come out of the proceeds of the fair tax. So by comparison, Social Security, very fixable. It is money that we have all paid in. It's money that has been paid into the excess of $3.5 trillion to date, more than what has been paid out. But of course, the government has spent that $3.5 trillion. So I would just suggest that this is very fixable, that this is very doable, and that this is a problem that is pale in comparison to Medicare, Medicaid, and perhaps we could argue the reduction of spending when it comes to the military.
Interesting that you should mention Medicare and Medicaid, since that's my next question. We have federal Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare, maybe, depending on the Supreme Court. How would a Libertarian president deal with the problems of providing medical care for America's underinsured, elderly, and poor?
As governor of New Mexico, I oversaw the reform of Medicaid in New Mexico. We took it from a fee-for-service model to a managed care model. We improved health care delivery in the state, and we saved hundreds of millions of dollars. At that time, I believe that if the federal government would have block granted the state of New Mexico 43% less money for health care to the poor, done away with all the strings and the mandates, that I could have effectively seen health care delivery to the poor, to those truly in need. I suggest that Medicare, health care to those over 65, that the same phenomenon would have occurred had I have been given control or oversight of implementation of the delivery of health care to those over 65, if the federal government, which has always been a federal program when it comes to Medicare, but if the federal government were to block grant or make Medicare a state program, block grant the states 43% less money, or have the states never send it, better yet, states never send it to Washington in the first place, but that I maintain I maintain that with 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, the states, that we will actually come up with some fabulous solution for healthcare delivery for those that are truly in need and those over 65. But the notion that Washington knows best, Washington top down has the answers, that's what has us in a state of bankruptcy at this moment.
Mr. Wrights.
As far as Medicare goes, it's not just a matter of money. It's not just a matter of budgets. We're talking about lives, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about care being rationed. Once you get too old, the government gets to decide whether you need to extend your life or not. That's crazy. It's not about money. It's about saving lives. Knowing that we're better off taking care of ourselves. Let me keep my money and purchase my own doctor. I can do a better job of that. I don't want anybody in the way when I'm sick between me and that doctor. I don't want an insurance company telling me he can't do such and such, or I got to go to another doctor so I can get what I need. I don't need a bureaucrat telling me, I'm going to take care of you, Lee. Don't you worry, I'm going to take care of you. They've lied to me too many times. They've lied to all of us. If you removed everything, and I mean literally everything from the federal budget, except for Social Security, Medicare, and the military budget, we'd still be putting our grandchildren into debt. We have got to stop these programs that feed this crazy spending addiction that we seem to have. I mean, if you got a crack addict, you don't give him more crack to get him off of it. If you got a spending addict, you don't keep giving them money to make them stop spending. We got to stop government, get it out of the way, let us take care of ourselves, please.
There was a major financial collapse in 2007, 2008, leading to what some call the Great Recession, and also leading to federal bailouts of large companies, including banks. Mr. Wright, as president, what would you have done in those dismal economic circumstances?
No one, no company is too big to fail. No one. Why do they take our money and give it to the corporations? Why? Well, corporations are getting people elected, aren't they? Why do the banks do what they do? Top 8 contributors to Obama's campaign were banks. Bailouts. Come on, folks. Who's going to give you a bailout when you need help? The government says they will, and then they say, well, we're sorry, but there's this regulation. You just don't cut it. I don't want to hear that when I'm in trouble. I want to figure out a way to get out of it. And I don't expect my neighbors to come over and bail me out. And I certainly don't want to bail out car makers, banks that are going to fail, Fannie and Faye, all of them. Let them fail.
Mr. Johnson?
Capitalism on the way up, communism on the way down. Look, there were some incredibly bad decisions made by Wall Street. They should have been rewarded for these really poor decisions by being allowed to fail, as opposed to us bailing them out, and then on top of that, paying bonuses on top of that. So much right now is being said about rules and regulations, that it was a lack of rules and regulations. I maintain that this was some incredibly bad decision-making that, like I say, was allowed to not see its way through and fail. Let me point out to you that one of the rules and regulations that played a role in the 2008 collapse was, you know, as a result of Enron, Congress came up with Sarbanes-Oxley. And one of the things about Sarbanes-Oxley that was contained in it was mark-to-market accounting. Personally, I thought, wow, this is the answer to Enron, and Enron never occurring again. Wow, this is a rule and a regulation that makes total total sense. Well, it turns out that on December 20th or thereabouts, there was a $180,000 transaction in a multi-trillion-dollar mortgage derivatives market. And so because of the law, everyone had to value assets that on the prior day were worth $1. They had to mark them down to 5 cents. And that was also a huge precipitator of the 2008 collapse.
Mr. Wrights?
I already answered that when I started.
Or did you already answer that? Okay, that's right. So I go to Mr. Johnson. Since the 1930s, the federal government has provided subsidies and loan guarantees to farmers. As president, what will you do with regard to these programs?
Do away with the Department of Agriculture, first of all. We need to get farmers back to farming. The biggest program the Department of Agriculture has come up with is to pay people not to farm. Well, I can't understand how that helped farmers, frankly. Don't do what you know how to do. Don't do what you've learned to do. Don't do what your parents told you to do. We'll pay you not to do it. Now, one time that might seem pretty attractive to me. Getting paid not to do nothing, that's not a hard job. Problem is that everybody else is paying for it. Me and you. I don't want to pay somebody not to work. It's just ridiculous. It doesn't even make any sense. And yet the largest thing they've done is pay people not to work. It's crazy. Do away with the Department of Agriculture. That's what I'd do.
I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. In that balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013 would be a 43% reduction in farm subsidies with the eye on the goal of reducing farm subsidies. And included in the context of farm subsidies, if there is any way to line out subsidy for ethanol, that is something that I would completely line out, believing that it takes more energy to produce ethanol than it produces.
Mr. Johnson, the President has the power to issue executive orders directing the exercise of power in the executive branch. What, if any, executive orders would you issue in your first week in office?
I will tell you that I had no aversion to implementing executive orders as governor of New Mexico. One of the things I did as governor of New Mexico is issued an executive order for the reform of welfare in New Mexico. The notion that if you could work, you would work. The notion that if somebody was making $100 from the government, how about if the government reduce that to $70, but that if you worked and made $70, you could make the 70 and take the 70 and make 140 as opposed, and I'm using this as an example, but the point was, if you could work, you would work. It was an executive order. It was challenged immediately by the legislature as unconstitutional, that I was doing this by executive order as opposed to legislatively. I will tell you that all of the help wanted signs in New Mexico went down. They all came down. Everybody that could work was working. It worked. The Supreme Court ruled after about a month that what I had done was unconstitutional. All the help wanted signs went back up, and the legislature never did codify into law something that we had actually proven worked. I have no aversion to executive orders, but I don't have any specific executive orders that I would issue within the first 10 days, if you will. But that isn't true, because controlling all the agencies, controlling all the rules and regulations, don't underestimate the power of that when it comes to change, and I mean positive change from the standpoint of reducing the time and the amount of money that it takes to comply with government.
Mr. Wrights, same question, and Mr. Johnson went over about 20 seconds, so have at it.
Oh, well, that's all right.
I had a minute left from the time before. As a libertarian, I was...
Do we have any banking rule in here?
You know, we got to be careful. We're going to have too much fun up here now.
All right. Anyway, this was the one about the executive orders that you might issue.
I can think of only one executive order, and I'm anxious to issue it. And that is to repeal all previous executive orders. I want a government that fits inside of this. If you can't see it, this is a Cato pocket constitution. Look how small it is. Huh? I'd repeal every one of them that's come before me.
Now, Mr. Wrights, following up, the next question is somewhat of a follow-up to that one. The United States has 14 non-defense cabinet-level departments. As president, are there any of these that you would work to eliminate?
Those are the first ones to go, David. See, that's part of the problem again. We got so many government bureaucrats and regulators doing nothing. I tell you what, I learned something when I was in the service. And it boded well for me from time to time. I didn't use it all the time, but I found that if I walked around with a clipboard in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, they left me alone. I could go get a cup of coffee. I got my clipboard, I got my screwdriver. They said, he must be doing something. Leave him alone. We got government agencies doing that right now. Let's act busy. Just act busy. They'll leave us alone. And they're right. They've been acting busy and we left them alone. It's time not to leave them alone anymore. Let's do away with all this nonsense. We got to reduce government. We got to reduce spending. It's the only way to return America to the prosperity we deserve for ourselves and for our children.
Mr. Johnson.
I am promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That is a 43% reduction in current federal spending, unprecedented. That is slashing federal spending by $1.4 trillion. I am absolutely open to the debate and the discussion with regard to abolishing any federal agency. Those that I'm specifically saying currently are housing and urban development, education, Homeland Security. Homeland Security being incredibly redundant. Education. I don't think that America understands that the Department of Education was established in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. I don't think Americans understand that when it comes to education, the federal government gives each state about 11 cents out of every school dollar that every state spends, but it comes with 16 cents worth of strings attached. So it's really a negative to take federal dollars. Return education to the states. 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice. You know what? That's exactly what we'll see. We'll see some fabulous success that gets emulated. We're also going to see some spectacular failure that gets avoided because we're so competitive.
Mr. Johnson, according to the Constitution, the President is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. If elected, how would you exercise that power with respect to the deployment of U.S. Armed Services personnel?
I'm a non-interventionist, all right? I do not want to use American military might anywhere. But I think it's one of the primary responsibilities, if not the primary responsibility of the President of the United States to be vigilant about military threat coming from anywhere. To my knowledge, right now there is no military threat anywhere. But to say that we should not be vigilant to what may in fact be military threat, absolutely. And when you talk about preemptive strike, well, preemptive strike is this notion somehow that if the trigger is cocked and that the trigger is going to get pulled, I think we want to have a president that's going to be vigilant and given the intelligence that the President of the United States has, can make those decisions and be on top of those decisions. But that would be also submitting that to Congress for a declaration of war, to have any military conflict anywhere. Non-interventionist. Let's stop using our military. Let's stop with the unintended consequences that comes along with our military might. Iran, to my knowledge, is not a military threat. We should be vigilant to the fact that it may be, but it's not, and isn't Iran an unintended consequence of us having taken out Iraq?
Mr. Wrights.
If I was Commander-in-Chief, there would be no more deployments. I'm serious about this, folks. I'm going to declare peace. Now, let's be clear. I am not a pacifist. There's only one defensible war in my mind, and that's a war of defense. If we're attacked, I'm going to go to war. And we're going to put an end to it, and then we're going to go right back to being at peace. We're not going to occupy somebody for 10 or 12 years. We're not going to keep our men and women over there dying every day for nothing. We're going to bring them home. We're not going to deploy troops anywhere. We're going to bring our workforce home. We're going to let these children meet their fathers and their mothers and learn to know them. Have enough people not died in this world already? No more deployments. Let's bring the troops home, and let's do it now. I'll quickly end with this. I was in Hawaii at the state convention. I stayed with a friend of mine. Every morning he listened to NPR. Drove me crazy. But I'm a nice guy, so I went along with it. This morning they had a spot about this young man that was going off to war. And they told how he was in the 3rd grade when 9/11 happened, and how this young man had waited his whole life to go to war, just so he could, hoping that it wouldn't end so he could get in the fray. And I'm sure he's not alone. We should not be raising children like that, folks. Nobody should have to grow up that way.
See, Mr. Wrights, I think you get the next one as well, to begin with. And it's somewhat of a follow-up to what we've just been doing. Perhaps in a broader way, can you summarize the foreign policy, the overall foreign policy that you as a Libertarian president would attempt to put into place?
Well, that's odd. Somebody told me right before I got up here I shouldn't talk about foreign policy. I said I couldn't help it. Our foreign policy creates more enemies than it does anything else. Because our foreign policy is what I like to call a nosy neighbor policy. Now think about it. What's worse than somebody moving next door to you? You never met them before, and just right away in your business all the time. Say, that tree in your backyard, it just don't look right there. I'll come over this weekend with my chainsaw and I'll cut it down. No, I don't want you to. Oh, don't you worry about it. I'll take care of it. Boy, that's aggravating. Makes you want to go to war, don't it? What would be worse than that? If that nosy neighbor lived on the next street over, or maybe didn't even live in your town, lived in the next town, or worse yet, lived on the other side of the world and still in your business every day. Our foreign policy creates the problems that we face now. That's why we have so many enemies. That's why we have to be afraid. Stop being a nosy neighbor, start being a good neighbor. That's my foreign policy. See, I don't know what they was worried about. That wasn't so bad.
Mr. Johnson, in your response, you will have about an extra 30 seconds if you require it, because Mr. Wrights on the previous question took an extra 30 seconds.
I don't want any men or service women to lose their lives while I'm President of the United States. I really want to put a thank you out there to all of you veterans. My father's here. Dad, raise your hand. 92 years old. My dad's here. My father paratrooped into Normandy the day before the D-Day invasion, and along with 24,000 others in the 101st Airborne Division did that. My father was bayoneted in the back at the Battle of Bastogne and lost a lung. That's a sacrifice that I don't want to have to see any other American undergo. I'm completely opposed to foreign aid. The notion that we're borrowing and printing money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar, and then we're turning around and giving it away to a foreign country, I think that's crazy. I think that we should have follow a policy of non-intervention, but I would like to also distinguish that between isolationism. I think we want to take part in debate and discussion and diplomacy. We want to be a part of mutual benefit for all. Balanced budget. I promised to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. That is going to entail a 43% reduction in military spending. What's a 43%? What is a 43% reduction in military spending? It's reducing nuclear warheads from 2,300 to 500. It's the military footprint that we have on the globe currently. It's removing ourselves from the current conflicts that we are involved in. It's research and development. It's intelligence. It's the military in uniform, and it's the civilian support staff that goes along with that. The biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we are bankrupt.
So, yeah, Mr. Johnson, you get the next one, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. Two choices, tough. Since 9/11, the federal government has given us the Department of Homeland Security, the Transportation Security Administration, and the National Defense Authorization Act. How would you approach the problems of domestic security?
I vetoed 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico. I had thousands of line item vetoes. Only 2 were overturned. It made a difference when it came to billions of dollars worth of spending. It made a difference when it came to laws passed that would have just added time and money for us to have to comply with government. I have no aversion to vetoing legislation. So how does that apply to the President of the United States? If I would have been President of the United States, I would have vetoed Homeland Security. Don't do it. Incredibly redundant. Incredibly redundant. These were activities that were already taking place. When they gave the state of New Mexico money for a Homeland Security department, it just became an added title. There was nothing added when it came to Homeland Security, when it came to the federal government. When it comes to TSA, I would have never established TSA, ever. I would have left airport security to the airports, to the airlines, to the municipalities, to states. And I dare say today that airline safety would be as safe and less intrusive. The National Defense Authorization Act. I would have vetoed the National Defense Authorization Act. We cannot allow detainment without being charged in the United States.
Mr. Wrights?
Well, I can honestly say I do all of that. Homeland Security, there is no more redundant department than that. We've had one all along. It's called the National Department of Defense. That's the way it should stay. TSA. TSA has been in existence for 10 years, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know there's only one thing they've never confiscated? A terrorist. They've got all your pocket knives and your combs with the pointy ends on them and your big bottles of water that you just can't have on an airplane. They've got all that stuff. They've never caught one terrorist. What good are they? They just make me late for my plane most of the time because I don't like going through it in the first place. I'm kind of ornery. I remember the first time that I went through the scanners, you know, and I had to go up there and do my little... I stepped out, there was a guard right in front of me, and he was trying to be pleasant. He said, "How are you today, sir?" I said, "I was fine until I had to go through that damn thing." And he launched into an explanation of why I needed to do that. I stopped him, and he had a trainee beside of him. I said, "I know why you're doing it." So he folded his arms. He said, "Okay, sir, why don't you tell me why I'm doing this?" I said, "'Cause somebody told you to." Theater, that's what it is. And by the way, the trainee, I'm sure she got reprimanded because she reacted the same way y'all did.
Mr. Wrights?
Yes?
Changing course a bit. What would you say are the essentials of a libertarian domestic economic policy?
Well, the essentials of that are getting government out of the way. You know, we get the question all the time, and I hope I'm not spoiling one of your questions, David, but if I do, I apologize. We've been asked many times, what can the president do about creating jobs? What are you going to do about creating jobs? Well, I looked into that, and I have found that there is a way the president can create jobs by firing people. I know it sounds funny, but it's true. We've done the research. For every regulator, for every bureaucrat that loses their job, 150 private sector jobs are created. It's not going to be hard. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired, 150, 150, 150. I know, it sounds crazy, but that would be my answer to it. Start firing people.
Mr. Johnson?
About a year ago, they came out with a report on who had the best jobs record when it came to their time in office. And I had the best record when it came to jobs. And my response to that was the same as my response to that when I was governor of New Mexico. I didn't create one single job as governor of New Mexico. The private sector creates jobs. But don't underestimate the power of the executive when it comes to appointing the heads of all the agencies, appointing all boards and commissions, in essence, controlling all rules and regulations. Don't underestimate that. And I will tell you that in New Mexico, rules and regulations got better on a daily basis. And they got better from the standpoint of taking less time and money to have to comply with what it was government wanted. So in New Mexico, I'm going to argue businesses went to bed knowing with certainty that things weren't going to get worse, because Johnson wasn't going to let them get worse, and he was going to always be advocating on the part of free market. I really believe that taking the money out of politics, I really believe that implementing the fair tax would issue pink slips to half of Washington lobbyists. I really believe that in a zero corporate tax rate environment, that if the private sector does not create tens of millions of jobs with a zero corporate tax rate, then there is no environment in which that will happen.
Mr. Johnson, what is the proper role of the federal government with respect to education, and what would you do to implement that role?
You know, I think I answered that earlier, but I'll just reiterate. I would abolish the Federal Department of Education, believing that if we give education back to the states, 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, that's exactly what we will have. I will tell you that as governor of New Mexico, no governor was more outspoken than me regarding school choice. I really believe that the only way to improve education in New Mexico was to bring about school choice. I proposed for 6 straight years a full-blown voucher system that, in my opinion, would have brought about competition to public education. Now, in this environment of giving education back to the states, if I'm still governor of New Mexico, and I'm one of those governors given control of how education gets run and reformed, I'm going to advocate on the part of bringing competition to public education.
Mr. Wrights.
Well, I too would abolish the federal education department, because I just don't believe in child abuse. What could be more important than educating our young people? Too important to turn it over to any government agency. Education should be taken out of the hands of the federal government, and I would go further and say that it should be taken out of the hands of the state government. Education belongs in the communities where those children will be educated, where the families get together and hire teachers and are able to keep an eye on how well their education progresses. Not to have all the strings that come from state involvement and federal involvement that has caused us to churn out so many functional illiterates. When my second daughter started school, we did the research. Going to school in North Carolina told us that it cost in essence of $9,000 per student to educate our children and give them a pretty crappy education, by the way. I think we were 47th in the country at the time. Put my daughter in private school for $3,000 a year, and she got a great education for a third of the price. That's a classic real-world example of how we can do it better than government, folks.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's my turn.
It's your turn now. When's it going to be my turn? The housing situation is in the doldrums, with many homeowners underwater on their mortgages. What, if anything, should the federal government do about that?
Get out of the way. For crying out loud. I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, folks, but here again is a perfect example. Has anybody been paying attention? Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, all that other stuff? Part of the problem is they gave loans to people that shouldn't have had them. And now they can't afford their home. Well, of course not. They couldn't afford it in the first place. I mean, let's bring some common sense back to government. Let's bring common sense back to America. Let's think about these things and not just turn it over to government and say, okay, I don't have to worry about it anymore. I've never been so worried than when government's involved in something.
Government absolutely bears responsibility for making loans available at interest rates and terms that were really completely unrealistic. And then individuals involved in taking these loans have and had a personal responsibility to understand whether or not they could afford what it was they were buying. I just think that if the mortgage market or housing would have been allowed to collapse, which it wasn't allowed to collapse, if the free market would have actually come to bear, that we would have seen a market bottom, and we would have seen it very quickly. And for a lot of people who had saved their entire lives, they would have found that that $180,000 home that they had been saving to buy was now available for $70,000 and would have been able to purchase that. So this is the land of opportunity. And if you look at the mortgage collapse, this would have been opportunity, I think, for millions of Americans that weren't given that opportunity. The government stepped in, has created another bubble with regard to real estate, meaning it's propped it up. We arguably still have not seen a market bottom, or at least it's an artificial comeback, if you will, of the real estate market. So government does bear responsibility, but so do the individuals that took out the loans.
Mr. Wrights. The Internal Revenue Code is a complex monstrosity. Compliance alone costs individuals and businesses billions every year, in addition to the actual taxes they are forced to pay. What would you propose to improve this situation? Mr. Johnson.
Well, I propose abolishing all federal tax, income tax, corporate tax, tax withholding, the IRS, abolish the IRS. Look, I know a lot of you don't want to have anything to do with taxes. I don't want to have anything to do with taxes. As governor of New Mexico, not one penny of tax went up over the 8 years as I was governor. That never happened, ever. The key here is slashing spending, something that has never happened before. Now, I am advocating on the part of the fair tax, which is supposed to be revenue neutral, but by many analysis, it's actually a tax reduction, good thing. But I think the start is, and that it is an improvement over what we currently have. Let's get rid of the IRS. Let's get rid of income tax. Let's get rid of corporate tax.
Mr. Wrights.
I agree. We need to abolish the IRS. We need to do away with the income tax and replace it with nothing. Nothing. The government has no right to your money no matter what it is. And I'm sorry, folks, but there's no such thing as a fair tax. Nothing fair about a tax that allows the government to collect just as much money as it is now and gives no break to the American people. There's nothing fair about that. It might be fair to government, but it's not fair to us. We don't need a national sales tax. What we need is tax cuts and slash the spending. That is where prosperity comes from. There will be no economic boost from just replacing one tax with another. That doesn't work in economics. We have to cut taxes. We have to stop spending the money. We have to stop borrowing 43% of the money that we do spend and stop printing bad money, money that's not worth the paper it's printed on. Now, this is a favorite subject of most presidential campaigns, and they will stand up, all, you know, the Democrats, Republicans especially, I'm going to cut your taxes. The president can't cut your taxes. The president can't raise your taxes. The president can't do away with your taxes. Only Congress can do that. But I guarantee you one thing, if I was president, the thing that I would advocate for the strongest is to remove the stain from our Constitution and abolish the 16th Amendment.
And of course, an American audience listening to both of you on the tax question is going to come up with the next question, which is, but how will you pay for the essential functions of government if we eliminate the income tax? Mr. Wrights.
Well, if we just had the essential functions of government, it wouldn't be that hard to pay for it. The problem is we've got government doing everything that it's not supposed to. We could fund this country on the tariffs and excise tax that were outlined in the Constitution if government was this small. This small. How much can it cost for a government that's this small? We wouldn't need all the taxes. Stop paying for golf courses in Tampa so underprivileged children can learn the craft. You laugh, but it's in there. Stop paying for learning the mating habits of the tree frogs in Oklahoma or whatever. Good Lord. We should look at a budget and examine it sometime. All the pork, all the politicians that have to stuff something in there for their constituents. The problem is we're paying for too much. Let's reduce government, get it down to a manageable size, and you'd be surprised how easy it would be to balance a budget.
Mr. Johnson.
I think that my advocacy of a 43% reduction is really unprecedented. And that we're going to need to have a president that's going to be able to articulate, to take on the debate and the discussion over what entails a 43% reduction in federal spending. Unprecedented, something that has never, ever happened before. And that needs to be the concentration. Now that said, I think at a minimum, that abolishing the federal income tax, abolishing corporate tax, abolishing the IRS, replacing it with a consumption tax is an improvement over what we currently have. And I would like you to know that as President of the United States, I would like to articulate the need for dropping that tax. I think as opposed to what we have now, which is corporate interest, which is government for sale, both parties with their hands out and taking money to grant an individual, a group, or a corporation their special compensation, their special upmanship, if you will, that's what has this country in outrage. I share in the outrage of the Tea Party, which is that we spend too much money and we need to slash spending, but I also share in the outrage of Occupy Wall Street, which is this country is for sale and we're selling it. Politicians are selling it.
The Federal Reserve System. Okay, next question. The Federal Reserve System was created in 1913. And before that, inflation was virtually non-existent. But now that Federal Reserve System is a central bank, which is, in most people's view, essential to our economy. What is your position with regard to the Federal Reserve System?
Well, first of all, I would argue that we had bouts of inflation before the Federal Reserve was created that were equal to or exceeded any inflation that we've seen today prior to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Look, I would abolish the Federal Reserve if given the opportunity, but abolishing the Federal Reserve is not the end-all. The end-all is to stop printing money. And if the Federal Reserve were abolished, Treasury could still print money and would still print money just like they did before there was a central bank, just like other countries that don't have a central bank print money. The key is to slash spending. And abolishing the Federal Reserve, what does that do? Well, it brings about transparency, and that's a good thing. So in lieu of abolishing the Federal Reserve, let's audit the Federal Reserve. Let's bring transparency to the Federal Reserve. Let's get the Federal Reserve away from their dual mandate of price stability and full employment, which in my opinion is strong U.S. dollar and weak U.S. dollar, and it doesn't work. We need to have strong dollar policies coming from the Federal Reserve. We need to have competitive interest rates when it comes to the Federal Reserve. And right now, if the Federal Reserve were to make interest rates competitive, we would be in the midst of a monetary collapse.
Mr. Wrights?
I agree with them in the Fed. Now, unfortunately, here we go again. And I've stayed true to this throughout this whole campaign. I'm not going to stand up here in front of my family and lie to you. Tell you I can do something that I can't do. The president can't abolish the Fed. The Fed was created by Congress, and Congress is the only one that can do away with it. But I would advocate doing away with it. I would also advocate repealing all legal tender laws. We return competing currencies to the market. Hard money, money that's worth something. And pretty soon those Federal Reserve notes will go away because we all know they're not worth the paper they're printed on. People don't want bad money. So yeah, we do need to audit the Fed. We need to know what's going on. We need to do away with them, and I think the quickest way to do that would be to repeal the legal tender laws. Like I say, let's return precious metals to the commodity markets, money, hard money, and the bad dollars will go away.
The Congress tends to pass very large, convoluted, complex, multiple-purpose laws. Some people have suggested that Congress pass a one-subject-at-a-time act. Mr. Wrights, would you comment on that?
Congress shall make no law. They should have stopped right there. I know it's unreasonable, so we'll let them make something. The problem is Congress is a legislative body, and it's just like every other legislative body. When they make a law, they don't think, this law's not for me, it's for everybody else. So why read it? It's not for me, it's for everybody else. We don't need to know what's in it. They didn't know what was in the Patriot Act, and they signed that. That was a law. Nobody even could read it. Making a constitutional amendment to require it would be nice, but Congress is not following the Constitution now. We've been asked the same question about, should we have a balanced budget amendment? That'd be nice, but Congress don't follow the Constitution now. It's going to be up to the American people to start electing people like libertarians who are going to go to Washington, go to your state capital, go to the city council, and do what they say they're going to do, and not spend all their time in office paying off who got them in office.
Mr. Johnson, would you comment on the one subject, the proposed, because it is proposed and already has sponsors in Congress, the One Subject at a Time Act?
I would absolutely support the One Subject at a Time Act. And I will tell you that I think what we need, President of the United States, is a president that's going to veto legislation with earmarks in the legislation. You know what? If 80% of the bill is something that I could support and 20% of it wasn't something that I could support, I would veto that legislation. Now, it's one thing for me to stand up here and say that this is what I would do, but I have to tell you about my experience in this area. I vetoed 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico. I want to put this... put this into context. That was like more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined. That didn't happen in a vacuum. There was debate, there was discussion. Look, the world was going to end tomorrow because of the bill that Johnson vetoed today. And I took on that debate and that discussion. And I will tell you, 2-1, the legislature was Democrat. A third of the bills that I vetoed in the legislature were Republican, because Republicans grew government just like Democrats. And just so that there's no misunderstanding, about who's up here talking to you, this is unofficial, but I believe I vetoed close to 100 bills where the vote in the legislature was close to 114 to 0, meaning 114 to 0, let's pass this bill. I vetoed the legislation, and the veto stood because of the debate and the discussion that followed.
On a related subject, Mr. Johnson, many pieces of legislation, some called major legislation, are hundreds or thousands of pages long of proposed federal acts. Would you urge Congress to pass the Read the Bills Act? This is proposed legislation that already has sponsors in Congress that would require public reading and public opportunity to read the bills before they're acted upon.
I would absolutely support the Read the Bills Act, but I go beyond the saying that this is what I would do. Here's what I did. When I vetoed those 100 bills where the vote in the legislature was close to 114 to 0, here's where my dialogue went. By the way, only 2 of these bills were overridden, so it made a huge difference. But here was my dialogue. Look, Republicans, I don't think you all had time to read this legislation, but I did. And here's what it says, and I think that it grows government. I think government becomes more intrusive. I think it's going to cost more money and more time to have to comply with this. I'm vetoing it. You go ahead and override, but here are my reasons, and that legislation was not overridden. Talking about legislation that has too many pages. In my first year as governor of New Mexico, they sent me 400 pieces of legislation. And by the way, the majority of legislation that gets passed is legislation that fixes prior legislation, okay? But they sent me 400 bills the first year that I was in office. I vetoed 200 of those bills. I always wrote a veto message, and one of the bills I said, this is a 260-page bill. It's too long. I don't have the time to read it. Veto.
Mr. Wrights?
I can't believe I'm going to say this. A lot of you are not going to believe it when you hear it. I finally found a law I kind of like. Yeah, I would support it. I wouldn't have a whole lot of hope for them following it since they don't follow anything else, but I would support that. We need to hold our representatives responsible for what they're doing up there. They need to take a lesson from individuals who have to be responsible for themselves. There's nothing worse than somebody that's sitting in a position of authority that has no incentive for doing the right thing and no recourse for doing the wrong thing. Let's start putting people in jail. See how they like that. You're not doing what you're supposed to. Congress is not oblivious to going to jail. Let's send a few senators and representatives to jail for not doing their job. Maybe they'll start doing their job a little bit better. If I've got to read them, they have to read them too. Can't believe my tongue didn't just jump out of my mouth when I said I agree with the law.
Mr. Wrights, do you support allowing citizens of the several territories of the United States of America to decide for themselves whether or not they wish to become a state or an independent country?
Absolutely. They're individuals too. You can't have freedom in a vacuum. You can't have freedom yourself if you're not willing to allow other people to have the same freedom that you have. All right? A lot of these territories are acquisitions because of wars that we've been in. And most of the people that live there now weren't even born when it happened. So sure, they've got a right to decide their own fates, whether they want to be part of our country or not. And if not, then let's establish trade with them. That's where peace comes from. That's where prosperity comes from, is trade. So they're going to, if they want to be part of the United States, fine. It should be their decision, and if they don't, then we should start leaving them alone, just like we should leave all the other countries alone. Let's not mess in people's business where we don't belong. Let's listen to people. Let's respond to people. That's what Americans really want. They want a politician that will respond to them honestly and let them make a decision. So let's do that, yes. Let's let everyone be free. You can't be free without letting everyone be free.
Of the territories that we have, I think Puerto Rico is probably the biggest territory that we have. And yes, citizens end up making it, and all the territories that we currently have, they're using U.S. currency. They do elect governors. They send governors to the National Governors Association meetings. So clearly the path has been set, if you will, and I think that the decision really lies with the individuals in these countries making this decision as to whether or not they want to have statehood.
My next question is about the issue of nullification. This is the constitutional concept that states and the people within the states essentially have the power to nullify laws passed by the federal government which the states consider to be unconstitutional. Would you address that question, please?
Well, I just think it's an exciting notion. I think it's an exciting notion from the standpoint of getting the federal government back to its constitutional roots, which is the 50-state model, 50 different states determining policy, getting the federal government out of state local decision-making. Best government is government that rules at the most base level, at the local level. So I think nullification really is an effective tool to bring this about. And I hope it gains significance, I hope it gains understanding, and I hope it's a tool that gets used more and more often.
Nullification is one of the brightest ideas the founders ever had. They actually put into the Constitution a self-defense clause because they knew from experience that Parliament, Congress, committee, whatever you want to call it, will eventually seize power and will become a tyranny over the people. They knew that the people, us, everyone, had to be the judge of the law. I can't think of anything more. This is one of the most important things that we have. This is one of the most important tools that we have, is we are ultimately the judge of the law. And if the law is judged to be unjust, then we are not bound by it. That's what the Constitution promises us. Now, I think people nullify all the time. We all do it. I don't like to drive 55. Y'all? Yeah, I speed on purpose. I didn't like that law, I nullified it. We all do it. You see, this is the way we explain it to people. This is how we make them understand. They're doing it already. And they know that it's a self-defense thing. We know how to take care of ourselves better than having somebody else tell us what to do.
It is said by many scientists and others that there is this phenomenon of global warming, and that's at least in part caused by human industrial activity. What, if any, role should the federal government play in dealing with the global warming or climate change issue? I think Mr. Wrights, you're up first.
Well, first of all, they got to get the science straight so we'll know exactly what's going on. I always joke, of course, you know, we have global warming every year. It's called summer. This global warming issue is one that depending on who you talk to, is it real? Is it not? Is it a horrible thing? It's not so bad. It's natural. We don't know. And I'll guarantee you this, government getting involved is not going to help us know any quicker. If anything, if we let government get involved in global warming, the temperature is going to go up 10 degrees.
Mr. Johnson?
I take the Bjorn Lomborg approach when it comes to global warming, and that is let's just accept the fact that it's happening, that it is man-made. That given, what should we do about it? Well, government should not get involved in this. Government, I'm completely opposed to cap and trade. I think that it would cripple the U.S. economy. And that the best indicator or the best cause of good environmental practice is a good economy. That's a fact. So we as consumers, we're demanding less carbon emission, and guess what? We're going to get it. 50 years from now, carbon emission will be reduced significantly because it's what we as consumers are demanding. So let the free market operate, and I would also point out that today, energy production is much cleaner than it was 50 years ago. This is something that we've been demanding, we're going to continue to demand, but if government gets involved in this, in my opinion, we're going to be spending trillions of dollars and have no effect whatsoever on the desired outcome.
A question from our delegates, or one of our delegates, is after this election is over, let's see, and I think Mr. Johnson, you'll be the first on this one. After this election is over, will you remain an activist within the Libertarian Party?
You know, I would like you all to, first of all, I view this as a job interview, and I really want this job. And if this turns out to be as successful as I think it has the possibility to be, I would make the commitment to try and be the spokesperson. And again, I'm vying for the nomination. I hope to get the nomination. If that happened, and if it is as successful as I think it might be, I would love to be the same spokesperson in 2016. I think that you all are making an investment. I'm also making an investment, and it's one that is long-term. And regardless of whether or not I am the nominee or not, I will stay a Libertarian for the rest of my life. And again, I'm just going to argue that I've been a Libertarian my entire life. I just haven't come out of the closet.
Mr. Wrights.
Well, here the governor and I do have something in common. I want the job too. First thing I'm going to do after the election is I'm going to sleep for about 2 weeks. I'm going to get up, move to the couch, and take a nap. And after I've recovered, I'm going back to work. This is my home. I've never been anything else. I don't know how to do anything else. There are no ifs, ands, or buts with me. I'm in the Libertarian Party to stay and to work to make this country a better place, and I hope you all will help me and join me in doing that.
Let's assume that Ron Paul, I think everybody knows who Ron Paul is.
Who?
Ron Paul was the Libertarian Party candidate for president in 1988. He's now seeking the Republican presidential nomination, but assume he does not get it. Would you make an appeal to the Ron Paul supporters to join the Libertarian Party, and if so, how would you go about it? Mr. Wrights.
Well, I absolutely would do that. In fact, I've already done it on the campaign trail. For instance, when we were in California at the California convention not too long ago, took the opportunity one evening to go into West Hollywood. I thought I was going to a fundraiser. I wound up at a Ron Paul meetup. This wasn't no ordinary Ron Paul meetup, folks. This was Ron Paul people organizing to take over the Republican Committee of Los Angeles, California. And I told those folks the same thing that I would tell any Ron Paul meetup group that I met. If Dr. Paul does not make it, you have someplace else to go. You have people that agree with you, that agree with Dr. Paul. I mean, I've been told I'm more libertarian than Ron Paul, if that's possible. Those people have a natural home with us. And the Republicans are letting them down time and time again. This time, the Republican Party is going to destroy the Ron Paul people by not giving them what they want, what they feel like they deserve. You have a home with us. All of you Ron Paul people out there, this is your home. Come and join us.
Dr. Paul asked for my endorsement in 2008. I readily gave that endorsement. When I dropped out of the Republican Party, I asked everyone who was supporting me to support Dr. Paul. I think, and first of all, I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody in this room, that at the heart of Dr. Paul's support are people with hearts and minds. And I don't think, given that people have hearts and minds, that they're going to need any persuading or understanding that there is a real viable alternative, and it's not a step back, that it might be a step forward, that it might be, gee, maybe I made a consolation in joining the Republican Party when I'm really in the Libertarian Party. That's the opportunity that exists here. And that's really key to this equation also, is as much as I would like to see Dr. Paul win the Republican nomination, I don't think it's going to happen. And when that comes to an end, again, with open arms, come out of the closet and come to where you always belong.
And now we come to our closing statements.
Already?
Already. We're having so much fun. The closing statements will be 3 minutes each. And I would like each of you to address this question. How will your 2012 candidacy and campaign benefit the Libertarian Party and the cause of liberty? And Mr. Johnson, I think you go first.
Well, look, I think that libertarians offer the best of both parties. The fact that Democrats historically have been good on civil liberties, they really haven't been good. The fact that Republicans have been good when it comes to dollars and cents, not really. And perhaps libertarians embrace the best of both of these. So I think it's a combination of civil liberties, and it's a combination of balancing the checkbook. I do want this job. I do view this as a job interview, so I'm going to unabashedly make this pitch to you. I think I've got it in spades when it comes to civil liberties. The ACLU issued a report card on all the presidential candidates and how they stood on civil liberties, the Constitution, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. 24 liberty torches was a perfect score. Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney got 0 liberty torches out of 24. Newt Gingrich got 4 liberty torches out of 24. President Obama got 16 liberty torches out of 24. Ron Paul got 18 Liberty torches out of 24. And Gary Johnson led the pack with 21 Liberty torches out of 24. I think that's an objective measurement of civil liberties. I think an objective measurement of dollars and cents is my 750 vetoes of legislation in New Mexico. Stop spending. Don't spend money. Don't spend money. Don't make us spend more money and more time to have to comply with government. And it made a difference. And I want to tell you that good government was easy. It wasn't hard. And easy meant that you looked at the issues first and politics last. Government wasn't for sale. I did an NPR radio interview yesterday. You're a libertarian, Governor Johnson. What do you have to say about helmets and motorcycles? Do you ride a motorcycle? Yes, I ride a motorcycle, and I wear a helmet, and I wear protective clothing, and here's what I said as governor of New Mexico. What I said is wear a helmet. But I don't want to pass helmet legislation in New Mexico because New Mexico has a problem that all states have, and that is organ donor shortages. And if I sign this legislation, so you got to elect somebody that can go toe-to-toe when it comes to debating and discussing libertarian ideals and how it will make a difference and how it can make a difference. I'm just going to argue that I got to have that experience. Thank you all very much.
Mr. Wrights, your last word.
Now comes the collective sigh of relief. The last man speaks. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves tonight. More importantly, I hope you see what I was talking about and what I've been talking about throughout my whole campaign. How we're different. You didn't see a debate tonight where two guys went after each other and looking for blood. You saw two applicants for a job that we both want and seek, and I believe both of us, either one of us would do a good job. As far as my campaign and what my staff and ourselves will do, regardless of the outcome tomorrow, Lee Wrights and his staff goes to work the next day, and we continue to do what we've been doing, trying to build this party, trying to find good candidates and train them. We're going to use our video techniques and our capabilities to continue to produce tools for the candidates of the Libertarian Party. Tools we so sorely need. I can't be anything else but a libertarian, so I can't go anywhere because y'all are all here. I can't imagine that I would ever do anything else except work for the party that I love, for the family that I love. And I thank you all for coming tonight, being here, giving us the opportunity, the privilege and the honor to stand before you and even be considered for the highest office in the land. I have never been so honored as I am here tonight, standing next to Governor Johnson. Thank each and every one of you for being here, for what you do, and I will continue to do what I do and help you. I love you too.
Well, tomorrow, all of you delegates will take on the great responsibility of voting and selecting one of these two men to be the candidate of the Libertarian Party for the office of the United States, President of the United States. So, my great thanks to both of you, Lee Wrights, Gary Johnson. Thank you.
And some of the delegates in the room here in Las Vegas, we're going to show the entire debate between the Libertarian presidential candidates again. That'll be tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, before we pick up with more live coverage at noon when the delegates vote for their nominee. The Chicago Tribune predicts Gary Johnson will be the Libertarian Party's nominee, but he could still be excluded from the national debate. According to the Commission on Presidential Debates, candidates must appear on a sufficient number of state ballots